"Emily, how could you do this to us?" my mother screamed through the phone. Her voice cracked from rage, disbelief, and just a touch of fear. "We're stranded. Do you have any idea what you've done to this family?" I held the phone away from my ear, staring at it like it had betrayed me. I could still hear her voice spilling out of the speaker, desperate and sharp like a knife, trying to slice through my resolve. And yet, I felt calm. Not smug, not gleeful, just calm. After all, it wasn't me who broke this family. It was them. The moment they decided that my sacrifice was optional, that my loyalty was disposable, that I was worth less than their golden child. 2 years of saving, planning, dreaming. 2 years of imagining the look on their faces when we walked the streets of Savannah together, laughing like the family we were supposed to be. And with one last-minute decision to take my little sister on the trip I paid for the one I designed for them, they threw it all away. So I did the only thing I had left in me. I canceled everything, every booking, every tour, every hotel, gone. If they wanted to cut me out, they could do it without my money. And now they were panicking, standing confused in a hotel lobby with no reservations, wondering how things fell apart. But I wasn't confused. I knew exactly when everything cracked, the moment I realized I was never truly part of the we they always talked about. This was the story of how I stopped being the family fixer and finally became the villain in their version of events. I've always been the responsible one, the early riser, the spreadsheet maker, the family glue that held all the chaos together, whether I wanted to or not. My name is Emily Dawson, and I live in a quiet neighborhood just outside Portland, Oregon. The kind of place where the trees outnumber the people and the silence at night can either comfort you or crush you depending on the weight you carry. I'm 29 years old, single by choice, and work full-time as a data analyst for a private logistics company. My coworkers think I'm stoic but sweet. My therapist says I've mastered emotional containment. I think I'm just tired of being the one who always smooths the wrinkles. My family, they're not evil, they're not monsters, but they've always had a talent for making me feel small. Not in ways you can point to, not with yelling or insults. It's quieter than that, subtler, more poisonous. My mother, Barbara, is the classic Southern matriarch type, poised, proud, and utterly obsessed with appearances. She thinks empathy is a virtue, so long as it doesn't get messy. Her hugs are warm, her expectations ice cold. My father, Frank, is quieter, the kind of man who clears his throat instead of speaking and disappears into his coffee mug when things get tense. And then there's Claire. My younger sister, Claire Dawson, is 24, and everything I'm not. Outspoken, flashy, Instagram famous, she does online fashion hauls and gets free products for smiling at the camera. She once cried because her favorite latte was discontinued. The same day I found out I'd been denied a promotion. Guess which one got more sympathy from our parents? Still, I love them, or I thought I did. Which is why I spent 2 full years, 24 months of tight budgeting, canceled brunches, secondhand coats, and freelance side gigs planning a surprise for them. A 30th anniversary trip for our parents to Savannah, Georgia. I picked Savannah because it was where Mom had wanted to honeymoon but couldn't afford to. It was romantic, charming Southern just like her. I booked the historic hotel she once bookmarked in a travel magazine. I mapped out every detail, carriage tours, dinners by the river, even a ghost walk because Dad loved history. It was meant to be magical, and yes, selfishly, I wanted to be part of that magic. For once, I wanted them to look at me and see more than the dependable daughter, the fallback plan, the family fixer. I wanted to be included, not needed included. But deep down I knew, I always knew. There had always been a quiet rule in our household: Claire comes first. When she got into trouble, I covered. When she forgot birthdays, I reminded. When she crashed her car, I dipped into my savings so Mom and Dad wouldn't have to take out a loan. They said they appreciated me, but appreciation feels different when it's only ever spoken as an afterthought, always coming after your sister just needs a little help right now. And yet, I believed this trip would be different. This was my effort, my money, my plan. I believed it might finally be enough to change the story. Spoiler alert, it didn't. The morning of the trip, I woke up before my alarm. I was too wired to sleep. Not with everything packed and waiting by the door, the navy blue suitcase I bought on sale, the carefully folded itinerary, even the matching travel wallets I had personalized with our initials. BD for Barbara Dawson, FD for Frank Dawson, ED for me, Emily Dawson. We were supposed to leave at 6:00 a.m. sharp. The flight to Atlanta had a tight connection, and I didn't want to take any chances. I was outside my parents' house at 5:55 a.m. engine running heater, on low listening to a podcast I couldn't pay attention to. At exactly 6:02, the front door creaked open and my mom stepped outside, wheeling her suitcase behind her. She wore her usual travel cardigan and that forced, almost theatrical smile she saved for social media photos and awkward family gatherings. "You're late," she said lightly, but not playfully. It wasn't a joke, not really. I looked at the dashboard. 6:02. 2 minutes late. "Morning," I said with a tight smile, getting out to grab her luggage. I was halfway to the trunk when I saw her, Claire, emerging from the front door, dragging her own suitcase behind her like it was the most natural thing in the world. My feet stopped moving. My smile froze. "Wait, what's going on?" I asked, the words scraping out of my throat, barely audible over the sound of gravel under Claire's roller wheels. "OM," my mom said, in that breezy, dismissive tone I knew too well. "We talked about it last night. Claire's coming instead." My breath caught. Instead of you," she said, as if she were clarifying the weather report. "Claire's been really stressed lately. She needs this getaway." She said it like a fact, like it wasn't cruel, like it made perfect sense. I blinked. I actually blinked, as if clearing my vision would make the words different. "Mom, I've been planning this for years. I paid for everything, the tours, the hotels, She waved a hand, "And we're grateful, sweetheart, really. But you're always working so hard. You can plan another trip later. Claire needs this now." My heart started pounding, a quick rising drumbeat in my ears. Claire didn't even look embarrassed. If anything, she looked smug. That same sideways smirk she wore when she got away with something. She shifted her weight to one hip and said, "Thanks for understanding, sis," like she was the victim and I was the saint. She didn't even say sorry. Behind them, the front door creaked open once more. My dad stepped out, rubbing his eyes, carrying a travel pillow and his phone charger. He didn't say anything, didn't meet my gaze, just handed me his suitcase and walked toward the car like we were still doing this, like this was normal. I could feel it, the heat building behind my eyes, the pressure of all the years I'd swallowed my hurt instead of speaking it. "This was supposed to be our trip," I said, voice trembling. "Something for me to share with you. I planned every detail, every dinner, every walking tour, just to make this special for us." "Well, it still is," my mom said, still smiling, "just with Claire instead." Don't make this a big deal, Emily. I could hear it even when she didn't say it. Don't ruin the mood. Don't be dramatic. Don't embarrass us. I clenched my jaw, biting down on the words that threatened to explode out of me. Anger, hurt, humiliation. They were all sitting right on the tip of my tongue. But I swallowed them whole and nodded stiffly. Let's get going, I said flatly, opening the trunk. Wouldn't want to miss your flight. And just like that, I became the chauffeur for a trip I was no longer part of. The drive to the airport was suffocating. Claire filled the silence with endless chatter about TikToks, about outfits, about whether they'd have time to shop in Savannah. My mother humored her with soft laughs, and my dad sat quietly staring out the window like he wasn't sitting in the wreckage of my expectations. At one point, my dad cleared his throat and said, "Thanks for driving us, Emily. I know this must feel unusual." I met his eyes in the rearview mirror. Unusual. That's an interesting way to put it, Dad. He looked away again. Claire leaned forward from the back seat. You're not mad, right? I mean, this is seriously huge for me. I never could have afforded this on my own. I didn't even respond, just nodded and kept driving. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. When we arrived at the drop-off zone, I got out, helped unload their luggage, and waited for someone to say something. Anything, but it was just more of the same. "Thank you for understanding, sweetheart," Mom said, giving me a quick hug like it was some kind of medal. "You're the best," Claire added, dragging her suitcase toward the entrance without looking back. And just like that, they were gone. I stood at the curb alone, watching them disappear into the terminal. My chest felt tight. My jaw ached from clenching. My eyes burned from holding back everything I wanted to scream. I drove home in silence. No podcast, no music. Just the sound of my own breath, ragged and shallow, as I realized something I should have known long ago. No matter how much I planned, how hard I tried, how many pieces I held together, I was never going to come first. Not in their eyes, not ever. And for the first time, I didn't just feel hurt. I felt angry enough to do something about it. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the numbness had started to wear off, and something colder had begun to take its place. Rage, no rage, is loud. This was quieter, heavier, denser. It settled in my chest like wet cement. I sat behind the wheel for several minutes, staring at the garage door in front of me. The trip I had dreamed about, obsessed over, budgeted every cent for it, was happening. Just not with me in it. I thought I'd cry. Instead, I inhaled once deeply and let it out in a long, shaky exhale. Then I reached for my laptop bag. Inside, nestled in the front pocket, was the black folder I had labeled the Dawson Anniversary Project. Printed itineraries, confirmation numbers, hotel contact sheets, upgraded boarding passes, every detail of the trip I had architected, like a blueprint for the perfect memory. All of it, mine. Not Claire's, not theirs, mine. I walked into my kitchen with the kind of calm that feels dangerous, not frantic, not impulsive, just surgically precise. I set my laptop on the counter, opened the lid, and waited as it booted up. The soft hum of the fan spinning up sounded like a war drum in the stillness of my house. Click, log in, pull up the spreadsheet. There it was, row after row of carefully constructed plans, each one with my fingerprints all over it. The Hotel Montgomery, a historic boutique inn in the heart of downtown Savannah. 3 nights in the King Heritage Suite, paid in advance, non-refundable unless canceled within 24 hours. Right on time. I clicked through to the hotel's website, logged into my account, and hit cancel reservation. A dialog box popped up. Are you sure you want to cancel your stay? I hovered over yes for a moment, my finger trembling just slightly. Then I clicked. The screen refreshed. A cancellation email slid into my inbox seconds later. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just moved to the next task. Savannah walking tours, private evening tour, canceled. Southern Belle riverboat dinner cruise, reserved table, canceled. Historic carriage ride, anniversary. Discount applied, canceled. Airport lounge passes, refunded. Travel insurance revoked. They didn't opt in themselves after all. One by one, I dismantled the trip I had spent 2 years assembling. Each click was a scalpel. Each cancellation a quiet cut. Not out of spite, not out of revenge, out of self-preservation. They made a choice that morning, and so did I. They wanted Claire to come first, fine. Let her plan the trip. Let her explain at check-in why the room she's trying to claim doesn't exist. Let her realize that influencer smiles and cropped selfies don't get you into a fully booked dinner reservation on a holiday weekend. Let her see what life looks like when someone isn't cleaning up her mess for her. By the time I closed my laptop, my inbox was filled with confirmation emails and refund notices. The trip still existed in fragments scattered across cyberspace like ashes. And for the first time since sunrise, I felt lighter. Not better, not healed, but lighter. I brewed myself a cup of tea and stood by the window, watching the sky shift from pale blue to a bruised, moody gray. My hands wrapped around the mug. It was still early, but I already knew the storm hadn't even started. They hadn't called yet, but they would, and they did. The first buzz came just before their layover in Atlanta. Emily, something's wrong with the hotel confirmation. Mom's voice hissed through voicemail. Call me right away. 5 minutes later, a follow-up. The carriage tour says it's not showing a reservation. Emily, did you forget to finalize it? Then came the escalation. Claire's voice, sharp, entitled, shrill. This is so petty, Emily. You're ruining our trip. I know you're mad, but this is too far. Fix it, now. She didn't ask, she demanded. My phone buzzed again, and again, and again. Dozens of texts, voicemails, missed calls. My dad even chimed in with a painfully bland message. Can you check on the bookings? Something's off. Off, I whispered aloud, almost amused. I turned my phone off. Just like that. Silence. No buzzing, no calls, no guilt. I sat on the couch with my tea and stared at nothing in particular. And you know what? It felt good. It felt like a first breath after years of drowning. For so long, I had been the quiet daughter, the capable one, the fixer who stayed up late, emailing venues, calculating costs, making sure everything looked effortless, so they could just show up and enjoy the ride. And in the end, they took all of it and handed it to Claire. They thought I would roll over and let it happen, smile through the betrayal, drive them to the airport, wave goodbye, and then go home to wait for photos I wouldn't be in. They didn't know me, not really, because the old Emily might have cried. The old Emily might have written it off as another slap in a lifetime of being sidelined. But this version of me, this version knew something they didn't. If you spend your life bending over backward for people who never notice, one day you stop bending, and when that day comes, it's not loud, it's not violent, it's not vengeful. It's quiet, deliberate, final, and that's what makes it unforgettable. The calls began before their plane even touched down in Savannah. At first, I ignored them out of pure instinct. I had just settled into my recliner, sipping the tea I hadn't gotten to enjoy earlier, when my phone lit up on the kitchen counter once, twice, then 6 times in under a minute. It buzzed against the granite like it was possessed. I didn't look at it, not at first, but after the 3rd voicemail, curiosity won. I walked over, picked it up, and pressed play. My mother's voice filled the room, tense-clipped, teetering on the edge of hysteria. "Emily, what's going on? The hotel says we don't have a reservation. I gave them the confirmation number you emailed me last month, but they said it was canceled. Canceled. We're standing here with our bags and nowhere to go. Please call me back immediately." The message ended with a beep. I didn't move. Then came another from Claire. "This isn't funny, Em. We look like idiots out here. You seriously canceled our hotel? You are so immature. Fix this now." There it was again, the word "our," as if it had never belonged to me in the first place. Another message buzzed in, this one from Dad, short and awkward. "Hey, Em. Listen, I'm sure this is just a mix-up. Can you take a look on your end? We're just kind of stuck right now." A mix-up, as if it had all just accidentally unraveled. I pressed the power button and shut my phone off again. No explanations, no apologies, no clarifications. Let them sit in the uncertainty for once. By evening, I had unpacked the suitcase I'd originally packed for Savannah. I hung up the dresses I'd carefully selected for dinners that would never happen, unzipped the bag of travel-sized toiletries, and returned my walking shoes to the closet. Everything I'd prepared laid to rest in its rightful place. It was almost poetic in a gut-wrenching way. Later that night, I poured a glass of wine and turned the phone back on, not to respond, but to observe. The screen lit up like a Christmas tree. 22 missed calls, 9 voicemails, nearly 40 text messages. I sat at the kitchen table and scrolled slowly, like an archaeologist excavating layers of blame. "Emily, I don't know what you think you're proving, but this has gone too far. Claire is crying in the hotel lobby. Is that what you wanted? This is embarrassing. We raised you better than this. You're acting like a child. Please just fix it. I don't want to argue. Don't punish your father because you're upset. You've humiliated us. You've humiliated yourself. And finally, we need to talk. This isn't right, Dad." I didn't respond. I didn't even type a reply and delete it. Instead, I deleted the voicemails, not out of spite, out of self-respect. For so many years, I had been the bridge between all of them, the mediator, the fixer, the one who swallowed her needs for the sake of peace. Now that I had stepped away, they were flailing, because without me, their dysfunction didn't have a cushion to land on. The next afternoon, the storm raged on. I was cleaning out the fridge when the house filled with the sound of my mother's ringtone again, shrill, aggressive, familiar. This time I picked up. The line connected with an explosion. "Emily, what did you do?" "We just tried to check in at the second hotel, and they said the reservation doesn't exist either." "Did you cancel it too?" I didn't flinch. "Yes, I canceled everything." Silence. Not long, just long enough to register the shock. "Why on earth would you do that?" she hissed. I took a slow breath. "Because you decided I wasn't part of the trip, so I decided not to fund the trip." "You're being dramatic. Claire needed this more than you." There it was again, the hierarchy laid bare. Claire's needs were always somehow bigger, louder, more important. Then maybe Claire should have planned it herself. "We thought you'd understand." "You thought wrong," I said simply. I hung up before she could throw guilt like confetti. 10 minutes later, Claire called. I almost didn't answer, but something told me I needed to hear what she would say. Her voice came through sharp, entitled, already halfway to screaming. "You're so petty, Emily. Seriously. You couldn't handle not being the center of attention. For once, grow up. This was my chance to get out of my head and breathe a little. Do you know how many people count on me online?" I bit back a laugh. Online followers, of course. I planned that trip for Mom and Dad. You hijacked it. Mom invited me. I didn't even want to go at first. But you went, knowing it wasn't meant for you, knowing how much I'd poured into it. God, you act like you're some kind of martyr. You're just bitter. "No," I said. "Not bitter, just done." I ended the call mid-rant and silenced my phone again. No more explanations. No more chances to make me the villain in a story they rewrote without my consent. That night, I fell asleep faster than I had in months. No phone by the bed. No restless thoughts chasing me down. Just stillness. It's strange, the clarity that comes when you finally stop waiting for other people to understand you. They don't need to. They just need to deal with the fact that you're no longer playing the role they wrote for you. By the third day, the silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It was brittle, tense, like the pause before a violin string snaps. My phone had remained off for nearly 36 hours. And in that time, I'd rediscovered a kind of quiet I hadn't known since childhood, the kind where no one expected me to clean up, show up, or shut up. But that quiet couldn't last forever, and it didn't. At 10:17 a.m., I turned my phone back on. A few seconds later, it was as if the world barged back, in buzzing, vibrating, and pulsing with missed connections. 19 voicemails, over 40 unread texts. I didn't open them all. I didn't need to. They followed a familiar rhythm. "Call us back now. You've taken this too far. Claire is still in tears. She hasn't slept. Your father is furious. What has gotten into you?" But what caught my eye was the most recent message, a call not from Claire or Mom, but from Dad. It rang again. I let it go to voicemail, and then again. On the third try, I answered. "Emily," he said, like someone who'd just walked into a burning room and hoped pretending it was fine would make the fire go away. "Look, this has gone too far. Your Mom and Claire they're exhausted. They're stranded, basically." I didn't reply. "You've made your point," he added. "Okay, so now let's just fix it. Fix it." Two words that used to define my entire identity. The unspoken family role, Emily the Fixer. But not anymore. I took a slow breath. "You want me to fix the trip you kicked me out of?" He paused. "That's not how it was meant." "Is that so?" I said. "Because from where I'm sitting, it seems pretty clear. I planned the trip. I paid for the trip. I dreamed about the trip. And you all decided I didn't belong in it." "That's not true," he said a little too quickly. You just thought Claire needed it more," I cut in. "Right. That her anxiety, her stress, her follower, count her overwhelming life. That all of that mattered more than the effort I put in. That her relief was worth more than my contribution." He sighed. "Your mother meant well." "She always means well," I said sharply. "But intentions don't cancel out the fact that you let me drive you to the airport while Claire took my seat in every sense of the word." "Emily," his voice dropped. "You're better than this." I froze. Those words, that tone. "You've always been the reasonable one," he continued. "You hold this family together. Don't let one bad call change everything." I felt the heat rise behind my eyes, not from sadness but fury. "That's the problem, Dad," I said. "You all counted on me to keep the peace, even when I was the one being torn apart." He didn't speak. "For years I've been the bandage," I whispered. You all cut, and I covered it. Claire messed up, and I fixed it. Mom overlooked me, and I smiled anyway. And now I finally pull away, and suddenly I'm the problem. He still said nothing. You didn't think I'd stand up for myself, I said. You thought I'd just fold again, that I'd eat the hurt and thank you for the crumbs. Well, I'm done being grateful for being tolerated. My voice didn't shake. For the first time, it was steady, controlled, dangerous in its calm. I canceled the trip because it was mine. You made me disposable, so I made the perks go with me. There was a long pause. Then he said quieter this time, "But you're punishing the whole family." I laughed, bitter, low. That implies this was ever a family that made space for me. His breath hitched. I could almost hear the realization drop into his throat like a stone. "I'm sorry you feel that way." There it was, the non-apology, the classic Dawson family deflection. "I don't need your apology," I said. "I need your recognition. I need someone to finally see what you've asked me to give up over and over just to make everyone else feel comfortable." "And what now?" he asked. "You're just cutting us off." "I'm setting a boundary," I corrected. "You don't get to benefit from my labor without inviting me into the result. That's not love. That's exploitation with a smile." His voice dropped even lower. "Emily, please." But I was already done. "I need space," I said simply. "And if that makes me selfish in your eyes, then maybe it's time I learn to live with that." And I ended the call. For several minutes, I stood frozen in the kitchen, one hand still on the counter, the other hanging at my side. My whole body trembled, not with regret, but release. I didn't cry. I didn't break. I simply stood there breathing in the space I had made for myself, the one I'd never been allowed to occupy before. It wasn't peaceful, but it was honest, and in this new version of honesty, I finally realized something. You can love people and still decide not to let them keep hurting you. I knew they were coming home today. The airline confirmation had popped into my inbox the same day I booked the original return flight, back when I still believed this trip would be a gift, back when I still believed I was part of the family equation and not just a variable to be discarded when inconvenient. Their plane was scheduled to land at 4:20 p.m. That gave me just enough time to stop for coffee and drive over to my parents' place not to greet them, but to be there when they arrived. To look them in the eye, to let them see what it looked like when the family fixer stopped fixing. I parked on the edge of their gravel driveway, just far enough from the house that I could still see the road, but close enough that they'd have no choice but to notice me. I sat on the porch swing, a paper cup of dark roast warming my hands, and waited. It wasn't long before a yellow cab pulled up, tired and late-looking, much like the people it carried. My mother was the first to emerge. Her hair, usually perfectly styled, hung limp against her shoulders. Her tan had faded into a reddish hue. Her expression was pinched. Claire came next, dragging a battered suitcase that looked like it had lost a fight with the baggage carousel. She was wearing oversized sunglasses, but even from where I sat, I could see the tension in her jaw. Then came Dad closing the trunk, with more force than necessary. No one spoke for a moment. The only sound was the distant hum of cicadas and the soft wheeze of the taxi's engine as it reversed down the gravel road. Finally, Claire broke the silence. "Well, I hope you're happy." I took a sip of coffee. Happy about what? "The trip was a disaster," my mom snapped, striding toward the porch with stiff movements. "Every hotel we tried was either full or filthy. The food was awful. The tours... Oh, wait, there weren't any. You made your point, Emily. I tilted my head. Did I? Claire tossed her sunglasses into her purse. You set us up. You knew we couldn't afford to book anything decent last minute. Interesting, I said, because I remember offering you exactly that, a fully paid, carefully planned vacation, one you weren't invited on. My mom's voice grew sharper. You're being cruel. No, I said quietly. Cruel was standing in your driveway and hearing you tell me Claire was coming instead. Cruel was watching you hand her the trip I spent 2 years building. My dad shifted uncomfortably behind them, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, like he wished he could crawl inside them and disappear. You didn't have to cancel everything, he muttered, not meeting my eyes. I stood slowly setting my coffee on the porch railing. Why would I fund a trip I wasn't even welcome on? If Claire needed it so badly, she could have organized it, paid for it, booked it. But she didn't. She just stepped into my seat like it was owed to her. Claire crossed her arms. You're acting like this was some huge betrayal. It was a vacation. No, I said. It was a pattern, a perfect symbol of every time I've been passed over, stepped on, or sacrificed so Claire could be comfortable. My mom scoffed. That's not true. It is, I said firmly. Every time I took the back seat, every time you asked me to be the bigger person when Claire messed up, every time I was expected to clean up the mess so she wouldn't have to face consequences. Claire took a step forward, her voice rising. God, you're so dramatic. You're not the only one who struggles, Emily. Maybe not, I said, but I'm the only one who's expected to swallow it. Silence, heavy, palpable silence. I stepped down from the porch and stood a few feet in front of them. You wanted Claire to go, I asked. Fine, you got your wish, but don't come crying to me when it didn't turn out like you hoped. You can't cut me out and still expect to enjoy the benefits of my labor. That wasn't our intention, Dad said quietly. But it was your choice, I said. My mom crossed her arms, her lips tight. We thought you'd understand. Claire's been going through a lot, and I haven't, I asked. I worked weekends, skipped vacations, lived frugally for years just to do something special for this family, for you. And the one time I asked to be included, you replaced me. Claire rolled her eyes. This isn't about you anymore. You made it about control. That was it. I stepped closer. Control, no. This was about boundaries, and the second you pushed me out, you gave up your right to my resources, my money, my time, my effort. You're our daughter, my mom snapped. Family doesn't do this to each other. No, I said. Family doesn't do that to each other. You don't get to hide behind the word family and use it like a weapon when it suits you. My mom's mouth opened, then closed. No rebuttal, no clever comeback. I looked at them, all three exhausted people who had built their comfort around my compliance. They had spent years assuming I'd always say yes. And now that I finally said no, they were crumbling. It wasn't about the trip anymore. It never really had been. This was about years of being the duct tape that held a cracked family facade together, and finally refusing to stick. I turned and walked back to my car. I'm glad you're home safe, I said over my shoulder. But don't expect things to go back to the way they were. And then, for the first time in my life, I left them standing there confused, angry, and entirely on their own. And I didn't look back. It had been 2 days since the confrontation in the driveway, 2 days since I'd watched the people I once called my safe place stand speechless beneath the weight of words I'd carried in my chest for years. I hadn't heard from them since. No angry voicemails from Claire, no righteous guilt trips from Mom, just silence. And then on Sunday afternoon, my phone rang. Dad, of all people, I hadn't expected it to be him. He was the quiet one, the diplomat, the guy who'd always stood on the edge of family drama, like a man watching a house burn down and politely offering a garden hose. I let it ring. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to protect the stillness I had finally carved out for myself. But something in me, something old and unresolved, pressed accept. "Hey, Em," he said. His voice was slower than usual, heavier, like he'd rehearsed several openings and thrown them all out. "Hi," I replied, cool but not cold. There was a pause. I wanted to check in. Your mom didn't think you'd answer if she called, so here I am. I let out a small breath. Not a sigh, not frustration, just release. "Okay," I said, "so talk." He cleared his throat. "Look, this whole thing, it's gotten out of hand. Your mom's upset. Claire's furious. And I think deep down we're all just trying to understand where this came from." I raised an eyebrow even though he couldn't see me. "Where this came from?" I repeated slowly. He continued, "It's just, this isn't like you." There it was, that phrase again, "this isn't like you." The ultimate gaslight wrapped in a compliment, the idea that standing up for myself was somehow a break in character. That self-preservation was deviant behavior. "No, Dad," I said, my tone sharpening. "It is like me. This is who I've always been. You're just not used to seeing it, because I spent my entire life being who you all needed me to be. No, let me finish," I said, sitting down at the edge of the bed. "You all loved the version of me that was convenient. The one who handled things, who covered for Claire, who stayed calm while Mom micromanaged my emotions. Like a thermostat she could adjust." "That's not fair," he said gently. I smiled bitterly. "No, what's not fair is being written out of my own story. Being replaced, dismissed, expected to carry the weight of the family without complaint, and then called selfish the second I drop it." Another pause. Then he said, "I don't know what you want me to say." "I'm not looking for a speech, Dad," I replied. "I'm not even looking for an apology. I just need you to understand that I'm not going back to the role you all cast me in." "But it wasn't meant to be like this," he said. "We thought Claire needed a break, and you assumed I'd just understand I finished. You assumed I had nothing to carry. No stress, no emotion, just infinite patience. That's what always happens, right? Claire needs and I provide." He didn't argue. That silence said enough. "It wasn't just this trip," I added. "It's birthdays where you forgot I was in the room. Holidays where Claire's drama swallowed the entire evening. Conversations where my opinions were background noise, while hers were treated like sacred truth." "I didn't realize," he said softly. "I know," I replied. "That's the point." He let out a slow breath. "So what now, you're done with us?" I closed my eyes. "No," I said. "I'm not cutting anyone off. But I'm done being the family fixer. I'm done sacrificing myself just so Claire can avoid discomfort. I won't pay for peace that only benefits others." "You've always been the strong one," he said. "And that strength came at a cost you never asked about," I said. "Now you see it. And whether you choose to acknowledge it or not, that's not on me." There was a long silence, one I didn't rush to fill. Finally, he said, "Your mother misses you." "I'm sure she misses having someone to manage the fallout," I replied. "But I don't miss being the fallout sponge." His voice cracked a little. "Is there anything we can do?" I thought about it for a long moment. "You can stop pretending this was one bad decision and start accepting that it was a symptom of a deeper imbalance that's been there for years. And if we do, then maybe someday we can build something new." but not until you all stop treating me like I owe you my silence." He didn't respond, but he didn't hang up either. We sat in that quiet together for nearly a minute. Then I said, "I have to go." "Okay," he whispered. "Thanks for answering. Goodbye, Dad." And I ended the call. I stared at the screen for a while, not sad, not angry, just aware. It wasn't a clean break. It wasn't satisfying or victorious. It was just real, and real was enough. It was strange how quiet the world became after the phone stopped ringing. No more missed calls flashing like warning lights. No more guilt woven into every vibration. No more emotional background noise demanding that I tend to someone else's fire while mine quietly burned. Just silence, and in that silence, something unexpected happened. I could finally hear myself think, not the version of me shaped by years of expectations, not the overachiever, the peacemaker, the default babysitter of emotional messes, just me. That Monday morning, instead of dragging myself to my desk and logging in early out of obligation, I did something different. I made a full breakfast eggs toast, even fresh coffee, instead of the reheated sludge from the day before. I sat on my back porch wrapped in a sweater Claire once mocked for being grandma core, and watched the fog rise off the trees. It was the first time in months that I ate without multitasking, without my mind racing through lists of what I needed to do for everyone else. The silence wasn't lonely anymore. It was sacred. Later that day, I opened the drawer I'd been avoiding, the one filled with half-finished hobbies journals I'd written in sporadically, and then abandoned books I kept promising myself I'd get to. And something inside me whispered, "Start again, but this time for you." So I made a list, not a to-do list, a want list, something I hadn't done in years. Sign up for that photography class at the community center. Replace the living room furniture with something that actually reflects me. Visit the Columbia River Gorge and hike alone. Read one book a month, no skipping. Travel somewhere new. Not for family, not for friends, just for me. By the end of the day, I had crossed off 2. I registered for the photography class, and I began browsing new furniture colors I liked. Not the bland beige my mother once insisted was tasteful. It was like rediscovering a voice I hadn't realized I'd lost. And once it came back, it didn't stop. I began rearranging my apartment, moving things not for functionality, but for joy. I took down the framed family photos from the hallway, not because I was bitter, but because I didn't want to be defined by other people's faces. I replaced them with photos I'd taken. Myself, park street corners, little slices of life I had once overlooked because I was too busy managing someone else's chaos. The more space I gave myself, the more of me returned. I started journaling again, but this time not to vent, not to explain myself, just to be. I wrote about the absurdity of guilt, the beauty of choosing yourself, the grief of detaching from people who never knew how much they were draining you. Some nights I cried, not from sadness but from relief. From the sheer release of no longer carrying what didn't belong to me. And somewhere in the middle of all this, I began to feel proud. Not loud banner-waving pride, but quiet, self-assured pride, the kind that doesn't need permission or applause. One Friday night, about 3 weeks after the showdown, I took a walk through the farmer's market downtown, alone, no schedule, no obligation. I stopped at a booth selling handcrafted leather journals and ran my fingers along the binding. The woman behind the table smiled at me. "You a writer?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I think I am." It felt good to say that. Real. A week later, I finally opened the spreadsheet I'd used to plan the anniversary trip. The color-coded tabs, the flawless itinerary, the budget breakdown. It was all still there like a time capsule from another life. I didn't cry. I didn't delete it. I just closed the file a digital period at the end of a long one-sided sentence. Then I opened a new tab and typed solo trip destinations. Because this time, the trip wouldn't be about fixing, proving, or pleasing. It would be mine. Little by little, I rebuilt myself not as the daughter my parents expected, or the sister they leaned on like a crutch, but as a full person, one with preferences, with boundaries, with a voice that no longer trembled when it said no. There was no dramatic breakthrough, no grand applause, just progress and peace. And both were more than enough. It started with a text I almost didn't open. A name I hadn't seen in years lit up my screen while I was sipping tea and flipping through solo travel blogs one Saturday morning. The message was short, unassuming. Jenna H. Hey, I saw your name pop up in a comment thread on an old photography group. Wild question, but are you still in Portland? Jenna Harper, college friend, dorm neighbor, the first person I ever confided in about feeling invisible in my own family. We lost touch after graduation, not for any dramatic reason, just the way life sometimes dissolves things you thought would last forever. I stared at the message thumb hovering. Then I typed. Still here, a little more cynical, a lot more caffeinated, want to catch up. 2 hours later, we were sitting across from each other at a neighborhood cafe neither of us had ever tried. A little place with mismatched mugs and too many succulents. Jenna hadn't changed much. Still wore her hair in a lazy bun. Still overused sarcasm when she got nervous, and still had that rare ability to make you feel like you could exhale without apologizing for it. We ordered coffee and pie and more coffee, and then the dam broke. I told her everything. Not just about the canceled trip, but about the years before it, the emotional residue that had built up like dust in a forgotten corner. The way I'd trained myself to ask for less, take up less space, require nothing in exchange for everything I gave. She listened, really listened. The kind of listening you only get from someone who knows what it's like to be overlooked too. Then she said something that stuck with me. Sometimes we think we're choosing peace, but really we're choosing silence. And silence is just surrender dressed up in pretty clothes. It was exactly what I needed to hear. Over the next few weeks, Jenna and I fell back into an easy rhythm weekend coffee, spontaneous bookstore trips, long walks through Forest Park. It was friendship without expectation, which made it feel safe in a way nothing else had in months. But what I didn't expect was Ben. Ben was Jenna's friend from a local hiking group. She introduced us at a community art night more as an afterthought than a setup. He was helping organize an outdoor photo exhibit and needed volunteers. Jenna volunteered me before I could object. The first time I met him, he asked, "Do you shoot digital or film?" I said mostly digital. My commitment issues won't let me try film. He laughed. Fair, but film forgives your mistakes. Digital just makes you obsess over them. I liked that. We worked side by side that night, stringing up fairy lights and helping artists mount their pieces. He didn't ask me what I did for work until 2 hours in. He didn't talk about himself unless I asked. And when he did talk, it was with a quiet steadiness I hadn't realized I craved. After the event, he walked me to my car. "I'd love to see some of your photos sometime," he said, and I surprised myself by answering I'd like that. It wasn't a whirlwind romance. It was slower, quieter. We went for coffee, then a photo walk through the Japanese garden. Then he invited me to a lecture on urban storytelling through visuals. He didn't interrupt. He didn't talk over me. He didn't ask me to shrink myself to fit inside his world. He just made space, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't second-guess myself while filling it. I didn't tell him everything at once. But when I eventually shared a shortened version of the trip that never was, he didn't try to fix it. He didn't say, "But they're your family." He just nodded and said, "I'm glad you chose you." That mattered more than any apology I'd begged for from people who'd never see me. One weekend, he and Jenna and I took a short trip to Astoria, just a 2-hour drive from the city. Nothing fancy, just a beach cottage, fresh seafood, and too many card games. On the second morning, as I stood barefoot on the deck with a camera in hand, watching sea mist rise over the water, I felt it hit me. This was life. Not the curated life I'd tried to build for my parents' approval. Not the version where I was useful before I was seen. Just mine. Uncomplicated, honest, chosen. I took a photo, the light cutting across the horizon, the morning quiet and endless. I didn't edit it. I didn't filter it. I just saved it. Sometimes we need proof that we were there, that we stepped out of the roles others cast for us, that we rewrote the script. I didn't expect the ending to be so quiet. No dramatic apology from my mother, no heartfelt message from Claire, not even a follow-up call from Dad, just space. But maybe that's what real change looks like at first, not fireworks or closure, but the simple absence of the thing that once weighed you down. It's been 3 months since the trip that never was, and for the first time in my adult life, I'm not operating on emotional autopilot. I wake up, and the first thought in my mind isn't, "What do they need from me today?" Instead, I ask, "What do I need from me?" I didn't grow up thinking self-respect was rebellious, but somewhere along the way, I was taught subtly, persistently, that choosing myself meant abandoning someone else. That love was about shrinking, flexing, sacrificing. That boundaries were optional if they made other people uncomfortable. I believed it until I didn't. Some days I still feel the pull, the guilt, the urge to check in, to reach out to make sure they're okay. Years of patterning doesn't dissolve overnight, but now I let that feeling pass without acting on it. I recognize it for what it is, the residue of a role I no longer audition for. I haven't cut my family off. I've just stopped cutting myself open to keep them warm. If they call, I might answer. If they apologize, I'll listen. But I won't beg for acknowledgement. I won't shrink to fit back into a mold I've already outgrown. Here's what I've learned, and what I hope anyone who's ever felt like the family glue learns too. You're not selfish for having limits. You're human for needing them. Being the strong one isn't a reward. It's often a disguise for people-pleasing and self-abandonment. The moment you stop making everyone else comfortable is the moment they show you who they really are. Your peace is not a gift to be handed out. It's a garden you grow. Tend it wisely. Sometimes the life we're meant to live is waiting on the other side of a single terrifying choice, choosing ourselves. Not because we're angry, not because we want revenge, but because we are finally ready to stop earning love and start living in it, even if that love comes from ourselves first. I recently printed out a photo I took during that trip to Astoria, the one where the morning sun cut through a blanket of fog just above the water. I framed it and hung it above my desk, not because it was perfectly composed, but because it captured something I never want to forget. The moment I stopped surviving other people's lives and began living my own.